Hey artists! So what we are going to be doing today is moving on to creating some darker values. We started out by, remember, marking off with a pencil where our highlights are, and those areas are still marked with a pencil for me, wherever I saw those lighter areas. I'm not going to erase those pencil marks until the very end. Then what we did was we put a blanket of dots over all the areas. Now they're not everywhere, obviously, just for the sake of the demo, I'm just doing the face here. But I laid a blanket of very sparse, far apart dots over the whole face. And then I started to very, very slowly build up some denser areas. That means the dots are closer together. I started to build up some denser areas of dots in a few areas. Now, in a few areas, I've already built up a lot of density. This is basically what I'm going to be showing you more of today, where you get your dots closer and closer together, so that way your areas will look very dark. Now, the thing is, I'm still using a 01 pen. Now, if you have an area that is very, very, very dark, so for example, I have this area under the chin right down here on this neck. If you know that that area is so dark that you're probably not going to really be able to see a lot of stippling at all, you can, if you choose, go ahead and with your thicker pen, she's got a little bit of like, not necessarily completely black, but there's going to still be a little bit of stippling there. But if there's an area that you see is completely pitch black, you don't see any little bit of light or anything, you can go ahead and just fill in that area with solid pen. Now that's up to you if you want to do that. If you really want to just make really dense stippling, you absolutely may. I'm just going to go ahead and fill it in. Now, it's important to use the same pen or brand of pen. I just changed brands because the Faber-Castell, the ink is pretty similar to the Micron. The Microns are a little bit higher quality, but what I'm saying is the color of the ink is important. Not every pen has the same color of ink, which might sound kind of hard to believe, but the reason why I'm telling you this is, let's say that, you have this big area here and you might be thinking, oh, it's just easier to just fill it in with a Sharpie. I would highly not recommend doing that because a Sharpie, if you've ever noticed when a Sharpie starts to fade in the sunlight, it looks a little bit bluish or purplish. The ink quality is just not as good as your artist pens, so it's very, very important that you use your artist pens for filling in large areas. Even though it takes a long time, like you see my process here, this takes a while. It's going to make your drawing look overall a lot better if you just use your higher quality stuff. So please, please don't just use a Sharpie to fill in large, dark areas. So filling this in, I'm going to go a little bit faster than I normally would, just for the sake of the demo. And I'm probably not going to get to filling in everything here, but you want to make sure that, if your area truly is completely pitch dark, that you fill that in completely. Okay. Now there's some areas of the face, this little area under the chin, this is a perfect spot for doing this, for just filling it in solid. Do this very, very sparingly if you have a face, if you're doing a statue or something like that. Those dark areas tend to stand out really, really, really dark. There are very few places on the face, if you're doing a statue or something like that, where it's going to be so dark that it's solid. So I would really stick with stippling to be on the safe side. And of course, if you're not sure, you can always ask, can I just fill this in? But I personally would recommend, if you're doing a face, using mostly stippling or whatever technique that you were using. Okay, so let's say that that's filled in. It's a little bit rough, but just for the sake of the demo, we'll do that. Now, there's a nice soft transition here it blends very, very nicely. There's a nice range of value down from the cheek area down into where that shadow is. So I'm going to take my thinner pen. I'm using my 01 right now. I know this area right here is very, very dark. What I actually did was I actually kind of took my dots, my little dot pattern that I'm using here. I didn't draw a line with them, but I did create sort of a line of dots to section off where that shadow is going to be. Now you could do this with a pencil too, just to be a little bit safer. You don't want those dots to be too close together. But you can see there's sort of a thin line marking off where the shadow is going to go. Now I'm still using my 01. When I'm creating a nice gradual blend between multiple values, I like to start with the lightest pens, do my next thickest pen, and then my thicker pens. And I'm going to show you exactly how that works here. So I'm still using my 01, but I'm creating a pretty dense pattern of dots here. They're pretty close together. They're not very spread out like the ones for the lighter midtones on the face. Okay, so I've got pretty sparse dot pattern there. I feel like my shadows could come up just a little bit higher, so I'm just going to kind of push some more dots out into the face, just a few here and there. Get a little bit more on this chin area. Okay. Now what I'm going to be doing is I am going to, sorry, I'm obsessively putting more dots in here. I'm going to take my 03. I just used my 01. Now I'm going to take my 03, and I'm going to start to make this gradual change from these values into that dark shadow even more gradual. So starting towards the bottom, around where that really, really dark filled in shadow is, I'm going to start putting in some more dots using my 03. Now I'm going to do these about as close together as my 01 dots were. But because the pen point is thicker, it's going to naturally create more density. I'm just doing this around that very, very bottom of that shadow where it blends into that really dark shadow that's completely filled in underneath the chin. And then if you feel like you need a more gradual change in value, you can just go back over, add a few more dots here and there. But see, I'm not coming up here with my thicker pen. I'm not going towards that lighter part of the face. I don't want to go too dark there. I want this gradual shift between my values. So it's looking a little better. And then you can go in, if you think that change could still be more sudden, you're not too happy with the transition, go in with your 05 or whatever your next thickest pen is, and really start to break up that little division of line between the face and that dark area under the chin. See how things are kind of disappearing together a little bit here. Remember, just going down here, right where it transitions, I'm creating a nice blend between the face and the neck area. Not going out here with my thicker pen. There we go, and I'm pretty happy with that. Obviously this could be a little bit cleaner, but just a demo. I'm going to do the same thing out here. It changes right here from that really dark shadow, and then the edge of her robe is right here. That's this spot. So I'm going to create this nice transition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill this area. This is part of her neck, probably where her collarbone is, but it's not that really, really dark area right here. It's this little spot right here. So to create a nice blend, a nice gradual transition between those values, I'm going to start with my 01. You know, you might be tempted to be like, oh, I'll go in with my 05 and just start breaking this up. But you might want to try doing the 01 first. Like I always tell you, less is more. It's better to start light. You can always go darker. You might accidentally go a little bit too dark and then you can't take it off. So I just like to be careful. I'm a very careful working artist. But some people like to be a little bit more expressive and fast with their work. As long as you're thinking about craftsmanship and the placement of things and making it make sense with your reference photo. So we've got a pretty sparse area of dots here. They're not super close together, but they're not too far apart either. So I'm going to go in, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did up here. So these were my 01 dots. I'm going to go in with my 03. And between these two areas, between my sparse patterns of 01 dots here and my really, really dark filled in area, between that, I am going to start making some gradual shifts in value by putting some pretty dense dots with my 03 pen. They're fairly close together. And I'm going to start blurring that division, this line of division between that really light value, that highlight, and that really dark shadow. I'm going to travel out a little bit more. If you want your value shift to come a little bit longer, like if you want your value shift to be very sudden, then you won't really do a lot of 03 out here. You kind of stick more towards the edge over here. I'm going to travel it out just a little bit. So I'm coming out to about, we're going to take a pencil here. With my 03, I'm going to come out to about right here. I still want there to be a pretty light area right there. So I'm not going to go too far out, but I'm going to go a little bit further out than I did on the face, on that jaw. And in a second, I'm going to erase this, that pencil mark, and show you what that looks like. Okay, so I'm going to erase that little line. Make sure you let your ink dry. Okay, pretty good, but I think there still needs to be a more gradual blend. This line between this shadow and this light area is very, very dramatic, and I want it to be soft and fuzzy. I don't want there to be a hard line there. So now I'm going to go with my 05, my thicker pen. And in about this area, about halfway across my 03 dots, I'm going to start to build up with my 05, some more density. Remember, the less white paper you can see, the darker it's going to look. So if you just work in steps, you work in these little phases of different levels of value, slowly getting darker and darker in different steps, you will create a nice gradation of value. It'll be nice and soft between your darker values and your lighter values. So I'm not going out too far. But I'm focusing around that edge of my dark shadow right here. Okay. Gonna let that dry for a second. Probably let it dry a little bit longer, but just for the sake of the demo, I'm gonna carefully erase here, smudging a little tiny bit. So see how that creates a nice gradual blend from one to the next. So again, you only want to do these really, really dark areas wherever you actually see them. So let's come over here to a part of the face for a moment, just so that I can kind of show you where I might do this on the face. I noticed that she's got this really dark eyelid right here, that part where her eye splits. Now, you might be tempted to just kind of fill this whole shape right here in, if I were to kind of draw around this. You might be tempted to fill this whole shape in here with black. But let's take it a little bit at a time here. I'm going to take my 01 pen, and I'm just going to do a line. That is where the eye splits, where the eyelids split. Now, it is darker than that in the reference photo, but I'm going to start with just a line. And then I'm going to move into my stippling. So now we can kind of extend that shadow just a little bit. I'm using my 01 pen here. We can kind of extend that shadow a little bit. And we want to create a nice gradual blend between that dark line I just created. Outlines tend to flatten things out. So I personally like to blend away my outlines with some shading. So see how that creates a nice gradual shift from one value to the next. It doesn't feel too dark. It doesn't feel too bold. And maybe you're going for bold, you know, everybody's going for something a little bit different here. Maybe you want a very traditional pen and ink where you're using a lot of care and attention. Or maybe you're trying something different. So I'm just starting to build up some more things over here. You can see I just did that line of dots that was going to section off this darker area on the eyelid. So I can kind of get an idea of where I should go a little bit denser. I know it feels like it takes so long to lay in your dots, whatever method you're using. It feels like it takes a while, but the result is going to be so beautiful. All of your viewers of your artwork will be able to see all of the time and love and attention that you are putting into every little dot. I'm going to start building up some more density. I already kind of started up here on the eyebrow, but this is a really, really dark shadow right here under the brow bone. I'm not going to just make a big dark filled in shape here. Because it's on the face, I want it to be a very soft transition. And I also don't think that this is quite as dark as this is. This is a very, very dark shadow. It's deep there under the chin, in the neck. This is dark, yes, but it's not a very, very deep area of the face. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep using my stippling technique. And I'm going to slowly build up my density. I've got a pretty dense pattern of 01 marks here, and I'm actually going to kind of draw a shape for how I want that area to look, just so that I know I'm going to go denser in those spots. So I've got a pretty dense area here, and then you can always fuzz things out on the edges just a little bit. Okay. Now I'm going to go in. I'm happy with my 01 dots, and I'm going to go with my 03. I know a couple people said that sometimes they accidentally grab the wrong pen, which is something that I've done in the past too. Always make sure that you are looking at it, reading that number, thinking to yourself, 3 comes after 1, right? I have to do that all the time. That's okay, that's part of the process. Now already with this 03 pen, it gets a lot darker right off the bat. Sometimes you don't even need to go into your 05 or your 08 or whatever your thickest pen is. Sometimes you can create really, really beautiful, rich, dark shadows like I'm doing right now with just an 03. So start small. You know, if you see a really dark area, don't just immediately jump into the 05. Or I recommend you don't. You know, you're your own artist. Do what works for you. You know, maybe you're very experienced and careful and you know what you're doing, and I completely get that. So you can do what method works for you. But if you're somebody who's still learning how to do pen and ink, this is still kind of new for you, I'd recommend just trying this method out first. And then you can kind of experiment with different things. You know, we all have to learn from mistakes here and there. So, you know, maybe you want to try something out that feels a little bit intimidating. Just understand that sometimes it might not work out the way you think it's going to. That's okay. It's a learning process. So I'm pretty happy with that dark shadow. That is a very, very dark shadow I've got going on there. Okay. So I don't want this video to go on for too long, but that's basically the technique that I'd use for everything, okay? Now, when you are done, when you feel like you're completely done with your pen and ink, I'm just going to show you some closing things that you want to make sure that you're doing. Use your kneaded eraser, make sure your ink is all dry, and you can start to erase some of those highlights. Now, my drawing is not completely done, but this is just for the sake of showing you what you would do next. I'm coming in here, and I am erasing all of those little pencil guidelines I made. Super important that you erase all your pencil. It's a pen and ink drawing, so you don't want to have any pencil left over showing through. Making sure you erase your grid. Mine is definitely not done, and you can tell it's not done, but just to show you that process here. I'm very happy with that shadow. I think that's gorgeous. Okay, so after you've erased everything, ladies, one thing I would like you to do, I would be really, really happy if somewhere on your pen and ink, you could just sign your name. Just a signature. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. I like to put the date too. 20. Wonderful 2020. So that's basically it, ladies. So if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to ask. Okay? Happy drawing.